Hello everyone, welcome back to Coding for Beginners, where we simplify web development one step at a time. In today's tutorial, we are going to explore observables in Angular. By the end of this video, you will understand what observables are and how they work in Angular, and also how we will use them to handle asynchronous data streams. So let's go to official Angular documentation of observables. So first off, what are observables in Angular? So observables are a key part of RxJS. So RxJS is a library for reactive programming using observables, which makes our handling of asynchronous data really easy. So in Angular, observables are used really a lot, especially when we are handling our HTTPS request using HttpClient, event handling as well, when we are transferring data from parent to child. Also form controls whenever we are using form and we want to keep track of form value changes, and also routing as well when we're going from one page to another. So we use RxJS a lot in a lot of these cases. To sum up, basically when we receive a stream of data which comes from here, we use some observable to change our data in whatever way we want. Like we emit that data in our way, okay? And after that we subscribe to get that data and use it into our components, which is called subscription. So this is basically everything about observables and RxJS. Now we'll go to Visual Studio Code and see how it works in practical. So I'll be using an existing project which I have already got. If you don't have an Angular project, you can create one by using command line terminal, and you can use ng-new command here, ng-new and your project name, and you will have one Angular project like me here. Once you've done that, we can start with our video tutorial for today. So in our app component.ts, we'll start by creating an observable which emits a sequence of numbers. Okay, that's a basic example. Like we want an observable which creates a sequence of number like 1 2 3 4 5, anything like that. Okay, so we'll start with here, we'll say my observable. So we want to create an observable, so we'll define my observable, which will be of type observable. Okay, and this will contain numbers, so we will give it number. Okay, once we have done that, here it will say it doesn't have initializer, so we'll define it like this. Once we have done this, we will create a method and emit values basically. Okay, and this method we want to call all of our sequence of numbers in this, so we'll say this dot my observable. So we'll use our of operator from RxJS. You can see it's imported here. So this will provide us with just emitted values in a sequential order. So we will say of like 1 2 3 4 5. What I mean by that, it will first emit this and like in order. Okay, so whenever this method is called, first we want the observable to have emitted values from this operator. Okay, once it has done this, we will say we want to subscribe. So we'll say this dot my observable, and now we want to subscribe to get the values, right? It has the values like in a stream it has got from here. So now we want to subscribe it, so we'll say dot subscribe. Once we do this, you can see that it provides us with a value, so we can have access to the value inside it. So we can say value equals to, so we'll use the arrow bracket and we will log the value, and that would be like value here, and we'll say value. Okay, so now we have access to the value from this observable stream. Okay, and it also allows us to see if there is an error as well, so we can say error, and we can do the same thing for that as well, like this. And this is the last arrow bracket, which is basically saying when our observable stream would be completed, this will be called. Okay, now in our HTML we'll do something, so our this method gets called. So here I'll just say after the name bar I'll say h2 and simple observables. Okay, and here I will say a button every time I want to click, right? I want to call that emit so that we can see our example. So we'll say emit values. Okay, and we can call button like call values. That's it. Once we go to our localhost, you can see this button call values. Okay, so we'll open our inspect, and inside the console, as soon as we click the call values button, our emit values method, it will emit all the emitted values from our observable. So I clicked it and see it is emitted value 1 2 3 4 5, and then it is called our completed method. So it has this fixed sequential order. That's what we used it for. So that's just a first example of how to use observables under the RxJS library. And now we'll focus on another example which we use a lot, is using observables with HTTP client. So we'll go again to our VS Code, and here, okay, so now we use observable mostly when we are working with asynchronous data, like whenever we receive data from HTTP request, when we don't know actually when the data would come in that specific order because it's coming from the backend. So in that cases, we use our observables, which is the HTTP client one. Okay, so to do that, here we need to, first thing we need to do is we need to go into our app module.ts file, and we will implement HTTP client module on a global level. So in our imports here, we'll say HTTP client module. Okay, and this basically is imported from our Angular common HTTP. Okay, once you have done this, we have access over it all of our application. Okay, now we can go to our app component.ts file and implement this as well. So for this example, I'll use a fake JSON placeholder API. You can also find that one using here. You can just go to Google and you can write JSON placeholder API. Okay, and here you can get free fake APIs, and you can use that one for the example. So you can use any of it from here. Okay, like if you want for post or anything like that. Okay, now this time we'll create a method called fetch data, and this fetch data method basically, it will fetch all the data from a backend request and show us in the front end. Okay, and for that we will be using our HTTP observable. Okay, so in order to use that, in our constructor we need to inject our HTTP client. So we'll say private HTTP, which will be of HTTP client. Okay, and we'll open our constructor. Now we have access to this HTTP. So inside the fetch data, we'll say this dot http dot get, and we want to get that request, okay, from the placeholder API. So I use this basically, which get us the post from the JSON placeholder. Okay, so once we use this dot http dot get, like how we used to do promises, but instead of doing then and stuff, we will do subscribe. So we'll say dot subscribe, and now we are subscribing to this stream of data which you're getting from a backend, like this fake API. So now we can say that the data we are getting, like how we did here, value, and we want to log, and we want to log the data. So this is asynchronous, so for that we will be using this, and if there is an error in that stream, then log those errors as well. And once we are done with this, we want to call our final method, which is completed, and we'll say request completed. Okay, so this fetch method, which is the fetch data method, now in our HTML we'll go, and in this button, instead of calling that, we'll call this fetch data. Okay, and we'll say fetch backend data. Okay, now if you go to our localhost, here we do inspect, and we inside the console, when we click our fetch backend data, we get all the data from our backend, and once we've got those, after then only we get request completed, executed. So you can see we've got all the data with all the user ID and all the other details. So we use, whenever we are handling requests from the backend, that time we should use HTTP, which has been provided us from the RxJS. Okay, now there's one more concept to it, which is how we are subscribing right here to our data. Whenever we are subscribing to an observable, when we want to consume the data that it's emitting, right, that time what we do first is we have a next function, which is this one basically, and an error function, this one, and a complete function, which only gets called once we have one of those. Okay, so another thing we have is also unsubscribe. Every time you subscribe a data stream, we need to make sure we are also unsubscribing those as well, which will help us to prevent any memory leaks, especially when we have like long subscriptions which have been running in the front end. Okay, so in order to implement our unsubscribe, we need to have a ng on destroy method. So which basically means when we are leaving a component, at that time this method will get called and it will clean up all of our subscriptions. So to implement that, it won't be possible as we have this fetch backend data method implemented in our main app component file. So this won't get destroyed, right? As this is the main component. So we need to implement this whole logic in one of our this child components like this routes, one of the home, about, contact or register. So we'll try to implement this logic in register, and whenever we leave our register page, okay, that time our ng on destroy should unsubscribe to our this observable, okay, which is the HTTP client. So what I've done is, in our first thing, I'll just remove this as we don't want any confusion. So we'll implement this logic in our register component, okay, this one. So here I have got this already, the fetch backend data method, okay. So when you go to register, you can see that we have the observable here, okay. Now in our TS file, we also got the logic for it. But in order to unsubscribe, we need a subscription first. So we will define a subscription and we'll say subscription that will be of type subscription, okay. And we'll just use this here. And now we need to give our this value which we are getting from fetch data, the whole stream of observables. We need to give it here, the stream of data which we are getting, which is emitted from here. We need to give it to this dot subscription, okay. Now this subscription basically is actively running and it has this stream of data whenever our this method gets called. So we need to unsubscribe whenever we are leaving our register component. So we will say here implement on destroy, okay. So now we will define our ng on destroy method, and inside this we will say if our subscription exists, right? If this value is not undefined or null, if it exists, then we want to call our subscription and we want to call unsubscribe method. As you can see, unsubscribe disposes the resources held by the subscription, right? So it cleans up the subscription, and that's it we need to do. And we can just check it as well by console logging it. We can say unsubscribed is getting called, okay. So now when we save this and we go to our register component, which is this one, we refresh it, yeah, we have. And now when we click on fetch backend data, you see we are getting our subscription. Basically this method is getting called and we are getting our subscription. We are console logging the whole thing, all fine, everything's working correctly. Now whenever we leave our register component, right, we don't want this data to still be there, like we want to destroy this subscription, right? So for example, if we go to contact page, you see unsubscribed is getting called. So our unsubscribe method is getting called, which is ng on destroy. So that's it for the HTTP observables. Now we will move forward to how we can use these operators to also transform our data, right? For example, we get some data from the APIs, the backend, and we want to transform them and show it to our front end. So we can also do those using these operators which have been provided by RxJS, and I'll show you how to do that. So here in this subscription, what we will do is we will say that this .http.get, and we will say that this would be of type any array, right? Okay, so whenever we are getting this time, before doing our subscribe, what we will do, we will use pipe. So we have pipe. Basically what pipe does, it chains our operator and it allows us to use other operators provided by RxJS which help us to change our data. So we'll use pipe here, and inside pipe we can write multiple operators to change our data. So we'll write map. Map is also the, as you can see from RxJS, is the operator basically which allows us to transform our emitted data, the data which we are getting from here, okay. So when we call map, inside map we get the data, okay, and that data now we can transform. So I can say data.filter is just the JavaScript method we use, and I can take each post which I'm getting from that data, and I only want the post which has the specific IDs like post.id which are less than equals to 5, okay. So I won't care about, for example, I'm getting 100 posts right now currently in our this request, but I only want post.id which is less than equals to 5. That's it. Then I'll subscribe and only I'll print those data. That's it. So you see what we did. We used a pipe operator. We changed our map operator and emitted the data, and we use filter to whichever kind of data we want, and at the end we used our subscribe to print those data and do data rendering. Now when we go to our local host, this time when we go to register component, and when we click here, you see that we only have 5 data here. That's it. We don't get, unlike previous times, 100 objects of data, because we have filtered it using our RxJS operators. So you see how useful these operators are. Like this, they help us a lot if you want to filter our data and all the emitted value, if you want to change those values, before even properly receiving it on front end. So that's just one of the use case of using RxJS operators. So like this, you can go to the official RxJS library and you can see all the operators we have been provided with, which you can use, which can help a lot in our development journey. So that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Angular content. And I'll see you guys in the next video.